Now, I don't believe anybody can realize the magnitude of the problem until they get into it. So, like John said, there's a myriad of reasons.
You're gonna get used to wearing them chains after a while, Luke. Don't you never stop listening to them clinking. Because they're gonna remind you of what I've been saying. For your own good.
Wish you'd stop being so good to me, Captain.
Don't you ever talk that way to me. Never! Never!
Give me a minute to walk over here. But now between the two locations, this looks more like a drug house to me. And some of the paraphernalia I'm seeing on the ground really kind of shows that. Now these cameras are equipped with night vision, and they are numerous. They're not just one of them. There's 2 or 3 that I see right off the top of my head. And I'm not gonna hang out here. I'm attracting attention. Now I am armed in case I have trouble, but I'm not gonna stick around for that. But I'm not done yet. There's more to come, and I'm not the only one looking. A lot of the mainstream media from here in town, who I network with, are seeing some of the issues that I'm seeing. I have never seen a Houston police officer go on a raid without a body camera. These are the people most likely to be involved in a use of force incident, and they don't have body cameras. Every Houston cop I know has body cameras. As a matter of fact, some of them take them home with them. So it's interesting that they're claiming these raid officers and SWAT officers didn't have body cameras. I'm not buying it. I am not buying it one bit. Well, that's it. Like I said, I am far from done. But I probably won't go live again with at the next stop. I'm gonna go start pulling some paperwork and documents, and I'll be in touch with you guys again.
We made a mistake. Didn't find a damn thing. I'm very sorry. And thanks for your cooperation. Let's go.
I want to see that warrant.
What?
I want to see that goddamn warrant.
There you go. Let's go.
You better give me my fucking money back, motherfucker. You ain't no police. Fuck y'all, give me my fucking money back. They jackets, what y'all sitting over there looking pretty for? Blast that fool. You don't give me no money back, motherfuckers. You ain't no police. You ain't no police. I want my motherfucking money back.
You motherfucker.
Good! Man, let's get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, motherfucker.
Two suspects were struck by return gunfire by members of the Houston Police Department. Those suspects, once we were able to render the scene safe by SWAT, were pronounced deceased at the scene from the return gunfire from the officers.
I want to speak on behalf of the 5,200 brave men and women of the Houston Police Department and the other 800,000 police officers that are working these streets every single day, putting their lives on the line. We are sick and tired of having targets on our back. We are sick and tired of having dirtbags trying to take our lives when all we're trying to do is protect this community and protect our families. Enough is enough. And if you're the ones that are out there spreading the rhetoric that police officers are the enemy, well, just know we've all got your number now. We're going to be keeping track of all of y'all, and we're going to make sure that we hold you accountable every time you stir the pot on our police officers. We've had enough, folks. We're out there doing our jobs every day, putting our lives on the line for our families. Enough is enough.
In this screencast, we'll discuss the Fourth Amendment and its protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. First, though, let's look at the historical context of the Fourth Amendment. Under English law, the saying was, if the constable blunders, the crook should not go free. In other words, if the police made a mistake, it shouldn't result in the charges being dismissed. Now, this was a problem because it encouraged the introduction of evidence as trustworthy when it wasn't. Whenever a police officer violated someone's rights, they could just say, whoops, I made a mistake, and the charges wouldn't be dismissed. So the Fourth Amendment tries to prevent this. It protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. It's important to note, all searches and seizures without a warrant are initially presumed to be unreasonable. Now, there are many types of searches without a warrant that the courts have recognized. Those will be discussed in Unit 7. So what is a search, and what is the purpose of a search? A search is considered a prying into hidden places. A search of a man's person, a house, or property. Searches are conducted in order to locate persons, contraband, not jail contraband, criminal contraband, fruits of a crime, and tools of a crime, such as a gun used in a bank robbery. The Founding Fathers recognized that sometimes searches and seizures would need to be conducted. They had to ensure only searches and seizures that were reasonable would be conducted, though. So in the Fourth Amendment, they created the requirement for a warrant and what it would have to contain. A warrant must first contain probable cause. Probable cause has been defined as facts and circumstances which would lead a reasonable person to believe a crime had been committed or a person had committed it. Warrants must identify what is to be seized, such as a person or an object, name or describe a person, place, or thing to be searched, and now this involves the who and the where. They must command a police officer to search. It's a magistrate's order. Therefore, it has to also be signed and dated by the magistrate.
Guys, I'm gonna just do a quick video. I'm out on the street and I'm not gonna tell you too much about what I'm doing or why, but this is the house from the shooting with the HPD officers on Monday. The crime scene units and stuff were here a little while ago and they've now departed. I'm gonna give you some quick shots from here. Some makeshift memorial up here. A lot of questions are being raised in the community here about this event. There are some inconsistencies in the stories, and so I'm out trying to determine, what's what. Something of interest. Look at those. Those are incoming bullet holes. Look how far from the door they are. So there's more to this, and I'll be putting up a video later today talking about it.
About to hear is Chief Art Acevedo speaking at a news conference earlier describing what his narcotics officers dealt with. The animation that you're about to see is a generalization of the home on Harding Street. The exact layout of that home is unknown at this time.
Shortly before 5 o'clock, narcotics officers from the Houston Police Department initiate a search warrant at the location at the 800 block of Harding Street. Upon making entry, immediately came under fire. The first officer through the door, armed with a shotgun, was charged immediately by a very large pit bull that charged at that officer. The dog was struck and killed. At the same time, a male suspect came from around the back and started an open fire with a .357 Magnum revolver. That officer was struck in the shoulder. He went down, at which time a female suspect went towards that officer, reached over the officer, and started making a move for his shotgun. Backup officers, other officers in the staff that made entry, discharged their firearms, striking that female suspect. An exchange of gunfire occurred, continued. That officer, who was actually the officer that breached the door, immediately knew that he had his partners were down, and he made entry. When he made entry, he himself got shot. After we had 2 officers down and another one shot, the remaining officers in the stack started laying down cover fire, left positions of cover themselves, and they all, I believe, heroically pulled their fellow officers out of harm's way.
Cautious versus what? Busting in with a tank without warning? I mean, what is it that's less cautious than busting into someone's house with, guns pulled, shouting? I mean, how is that cautious?
Free Talk Live.
I'm sure you've heard the news out of Houston.
What happened in Houston?
So basically what it was on the word of a confidential informant, some police officers went to serve a no-knock warrant or a simultaneous knock and go in the door of a couple in Houston. They burst through the door while screaming police and were quickly met with rounds from the person who lived there.
Okay.
As I think a lot of people would likely do if it were, I think it was early in the morning, and you heard screaming and your door being knocked open.
Now, were these actual cops who were going through, or were these other criminals who were masquerading as police?
In this instance, this was the actual police.
Okay.
They were serving a warrant because a confidential informant had told them that there were drugs in the house. Now, since they've got a chance to go through, all police were killed in this.
What?
Excuse me. Both suspects were killed.
Oh.
And I don't know I think the story will cover who's still living on the police side, but it was a...
Did cops get killed too?
I believe so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is this the one where there were... it was the wrong house?
There's been some conjecture as to that, but the address of the building does match what was on the warrant. So we do know that, but
that doesn't mean it was the right house.
That's correct, or that there were ever any drugs there. And this comes to us from Reason.com. No-knock warrant for deadly drug raid describes heroin and a gun cops didn't find. Houston narcotics officers thought busting into the house without warning was the, quote, cautious approach. According to the search warrant authorizing... Yeah, exactly. And
what? Cautious versus what? Busting in with a tank without warning? I mean, what is it that's less cautious than busting into someone's house with, guns pulled, shouting? I mean, how is that cautious?
There's a lot to discuss about that, and I really believe that, if you are one of those people, and there are a lot of you out there who, really you put value in not only human life but police officers' lives. You don't want a kid to not have his father come home at the end of the day. I get that. But is no knock really the right way to do that? My argument is you are putting everybody in a tremendous amount of harm.
But Chris, they might flush the drugs. That's why they need to no knock.
Yes, and that's a great point. The reason why it was argued and the Supreme Court upheld this, the reason they do no knock is so that they cannot get rid of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, in this instance, you have a number of police officers getting shot. I believe a couple of them critically, but we'll get into that here. According to the search warrant authorizing the drug raid that killed a middle-aged Houston couple in their home on Monday, police were expecting to find many plastic bags containing a, quote, brown powder identified as black tar heroin. Instead, they found an unspecified amount of marijuana and a white powder that they thought might be cocaine or fentanyl. The no-knock warrant obtained by KTRK, the ABC affiliate in Houston, was approved by Houston Municipal Court Judge Gordon Markham on Monday afternoon about 3.5 hours before narcotics officers burst into the home of Dennis Tuttle and Rodina Nicholas at 7815 Harding Street. On Sunday, the officer who applied for the search warrant says in his affidavit he sent a confidential informant to buy heroin at that location from a, quote, white male whose name is unknown, unquote. The CI emerged from the house with a quantity of brown powder, that's in quotes, and reported that he had seen more of it packaged in a, quote, in large containers, a large quantity of small baggies, unquote.
So the cops sent their informant allegedly into this house
to buy heroin. Allegedly, the CI said, "Yeah, I bought heroin, and there's a bunch more in there. It's all over the place." The officer, whose name is blacked out, says he was watching the informant the whole time, and adds that afterwards, quote, surveillance was placed on the above location in question by narcotics officers, unquote. So where did the heroin go? According to the affidavit, there were numerous bags in the house on Sunday, yet they had disappeared by the following evening, notwithstanding the police surveillance. So they raided by the next night. Right.
Okay.
After they had put surveillance in place. Allegedly, people were watching this house the whole time.
Yeah.
And they go in the next day, and there is nothing there. That is
Except for some marijuana and an unidentified as yet, or at least maybe they will identify later in the story, white substance.
Right. And at this point, they have not identified, and they have not released what they've identified it as. But it could be anything. That is not the only inconsistency. The CI claimed to have seen a, quote, semi-automatic handgun of a 9mm caliber, unquote, in the house on Sunday. Yet police found no such weapon on Monday. In addition to the .357 Magnum that Tuttle reportedly fired at the narcotics officers after they knocked down his door and killed his dog with a shotgun.
Oh, man.
Police found 3 shotguns, a .22 rifle, and a Remington 700 bolt-action rifle.
But this is Texas.
That is a paltry amount of firearms.
Yeah.
It's a paltry amount of firearms for your average home in New Hampshire, I think.
It's Texas, though. I mean, so it's not uncommon to find guns, I would imagine, in somebody's home.
Right. And if people have a deer rifle, which is what a 700 Remington is, bolt-action rifle, they're likely going to have a shotgun.
So both of these folks ended up getting killed by the cops.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's correct.
This is tragic.
Yes.
So, I mean, look, if the idea is that they had all this heroin and the house was then put under surveillance for the next 24 hours, and then they raid the house, and we're wondering where the heroin went to. Presumably, they would have seen somebody leave if they'd left the residence.
One would have thought.
Should have tracked them that way. But also, so it's not like they got tipped off, right? Because if they were tipped off, they would have gotten rid of the marijuana as well.
One would think.
So there's more coming up here.
And Rich, we've been talking about this tragic event that happened in Houston, Texas, involving another no-knock raid. And if you're not familiar with the term no-knock raid...
Wait, there was a tragic one, too? I heard some home invaders got what they deserved.
That is certainly one way to look at it. I'm going to call it a tragic one because
in this case,
2 innocent people died.
Yeah, the 2 people who were in the home
were killed. That was unfortunate.
Yeah.
And the innocent dog as well.
Yes, because a dog is a lethal threat.
That's what the cops want you to believe.
Well, and really, I don't know how postal employees make it through. I mean, how do they even end up retiring? Aren't they all killed by dogs?
No, they carry things like mace.
They do.
Yeah.
And sometimes
takes care of it.
I've talked to a couple mail carriers, and sometimes they'll use their boot.
Sure.
And frequently that will dissuade a dog from attacking. But police officers like to go in guns blazing. And I've it's not a week that goes by that we don't hear about some new example of puppycide.
Yep. Isn't there a website for that?
There is. I'm sure there is. I just watched a video. It couldn't have been more than a week or 2 ago, but the dog could not have weighed more than 6 pounds. I mean, the dog was tiny. I almost had admiration for the police officer who brutally murdered the dog for being able to shoot such a small target from such a great distance. It was disgusting and sad.
The website, by the way, is PuppySideDB, as in database, PuppySideDB.com, and they have recorded 2,939 acts of violence by police against animals.
Unbelievable. But we were talking about this no-knock raid, and for those of you who may not be familiar with what a no-knock raid is, that means that police officers can petition the judge to classify a particular warrant as a no-knock warrant. They're not all automatic no-knock warrants. They have to get a little bit of additional information, and then the judge can say, okay, I understand your reasoning here. This is protected. The police are protected in using these by a Supreme Court decision, which they successfully argued that if you gave the suspect more time than necessary, they could get rid of the evidence. And the evidence, it's just drugs. That's what they're talking about.
Yep. Oh, they're going to get rid of the drugs. Got to be a no-knock.
Right. So we have to do a no-knock.
Maximum violence.
I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm going to ballpark it, and I'm going to ballpark it really, really close because I just read this. I was looking up what the number of no-knock raids were when they started doing them, and that was kind of in the early 80s. There were about 400 of them nationwide.
Per year?
Per year.
Now it's what, 40,000?
In 2004, they served 50,000 no-knocks.
Wow.
So a reason, whether you're pro-police, whether you're anti-police, whether you're pro-drug, anti-drug, people get killed in these things. That's the problem. It is a systemic problem.
Well, Chris, if we want to stop drugs, you got to break a few eggs.
No,
you got to break a few eggs.
You got to build a wall. Didn't we just learn this?
You got to build a wall and break eggs.
Which one is
you
it?
You got to throw eggs off the wall like Humpty Dumpty. And they break, and all the king's horses and all the king's men.
Somebody had to come forward with the Humpty Dumpty analogy. But this idea that you are going to stop drugs by making them illegal.
You just need to raid harder. Just raid harder. More raids, more often, more hard raids. Yeah, more violence, more killing dogs. Eventually those drug users will get the message, won't they?
Will they? But in this case, it was yet another no-knock warrant. And as we just learned in the last segment,
more unnecessary killing.
The confidential informant, and confidential informants are notoriously unreliable.
Right.
This is where most cases tend to fall apart because a police officer didn't see it. He's just getting the word of someone who is trying to get something out of this.
Right. Usually it's getting off on some sort of criminal charge.
Right. When he's been busted for drugs or something like that.
I remember your case, Rich Paul. There was a confidential informant who was busted for dealing heroin, who then rolled on you for selling marijuana. So they actually let a heroin dealer free into the streets so they could bust Rich for selling weed.
Richie the Snitch, Richie DuPont.
Yeah.
And that's absurd.
And Rich's case was particularly unique because you actually didn't take a plea deal. So you went to trial, so they actually had to put the snitch on trial. Because most of the time they're going to tell the snitch, oh, don't worry, you won't have to testify.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, he did have to testify. So everybody got to see his face.
And they got to see his face with fewer teeth too. Because,
Really?
Yeah. Funny thing, I apparently he got into it with my friend Mark at work one day, and
Really?
he lost some teeth.
Mark Capuzzo?
I can't imagine what they were arguing over.
Whoops. Snitches get dentures.
Yeah, in this case.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump back into this story. And again, when they went in the next day, keep in mind the police allegedly had a confidential informant who said, I just bought some brown substance in a plastic baggie, and there's plenty more baggies there. The police officers immediately placed the residents under surveillance. They're watching it the whole time. They go in, and they find no baggies. So where did the heroin go? According to the affidavit, there were numerous bags of it in the house on Sunday, yet they had disappeared by the following evening, notwithstanding the police surveillance. This is not the only inconsistency. The CI claimed to have seen, quote, a semi-automatic handgun of a 9mm caliber, unquote, in the house, and there was no such weapon there. It does.
They must have flushed it down the toilet.
They must have. They did find his .357, which he allegedly fired at the narcotics officers as they were breaking his door down and killing his dog. Then
eventually killing him.
Yeah,
and his girlfriend or wife or whatever.
Yep.
These things happen so often, and we don't talk about them very often, considering how often they go down. This one particularly bloodier than your typical ones.
Yes, and regardless of what side you're on, if you're pro drug, okay, you're going to be upset because there was nobody harming anybody here.
Right.
But the police decided to come in with guns blazing, and this is what happens.
And you don't have to be pro-drug for that. I mean, heroin is a bad thing. I don't approve of people using it.
Right.
I just don't approve of people killing other people for using it. And I don't care about the heroin when it comes down to violence. If you kick down another man's door without his permission, then you deserve a face full of hot lead.
Right.
Doesn't matter what the judge said.
And I think most police supporters would agree with that too. They would agree that you own your home. Your home is your castle. And does that mean that you can just be literally, people can knock down your door and shoot first and ask questions later? And that's the question. It is not something, I mean, there was so much written prior to the United States existing. English common law, the Magna Carta, all talking about overreaches of government and things that they attempted to put in place to prevent them.
Oh, but that's before they had flush toilets. Flush toilets changed morality.
What? Is that what it did?
Well, without toilets, they couldn't flush the evidence.
Gotcha.
Never heard quite that take on it.
Yep.
But I'm going to finish up where we were discussing this story, and this has to do, again, with the no-knock raid that went down in Houston, Texas. Both quote-unquote suspects in this were shot dead by police officers, and a number of police officers were wounded, some seriously, when they tried to execute a warrant using a technique called no-knock.
All of it is completely senseless, a total waste of life. And you just told me off the air these folks had lived there for 20 years.
Yeah, it wasn't like they just moved into the neighborhood. It wasn't like people there didn't know them. And I think it stretches the incredulity a little bit to think that, oh my God, Bob and Wanda were massive heroin kingpins.
Except there weren't were no bags of heroin found.
Right. And there was also no firearm that the confidential informant.
Well, there were firearms.
There were, but not like he had described it. He was very specific. A semi-automatic 9mm pistol.
They didn't find
clear
that.
view. There wasn't one of those.
Found a shotgun.
They did.
Found a rifle.
They did. They did not find all sorts of baggies filled with brown black tar heroin, or what they suspected were that. And as this continues, as it turns out,
well, now one of the questions that they didn't answer in the story is they said they sent a confidential informant in, and the CI ostensibly bought one of these bags of heroin.
Right.
Did they ever test that heroin, or did the CI put it up his nose, or shoot it up, or whatever it is that you do with a bag of black tar heroin?
I don't know, and they haven't talked about it here. This is, I think, the second or third article on this that Reason's done, so I know they've covered more of the details in previous pieces, but these are all good questions. I mean, by the third article, I think we would have had some answers by now, but the police seem to be very tight-lipped about this, except to say, we're going out there, we're putting our lives on the line every single day,
to violate your rights. Why don't you appreciate it?
I did not bring this story in, but the head of the police union in Texas, or at least in Houston, came out and said, I've had enough of you dirtbags calling us murderers and things like that, and we know who every one of you are.
Wait, talking about his critics?
Talking about critics of this particular case.
Well, I'm one of them. That guy who called and said, hey, you're the reason we need AR-15s and M16s. That was me. Write that down.
Does Rich's position strike you as a little bit strong? If so, call us at 855-450-FREE.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to get anybody calling in to support no-knock raids. I mean, are there actually people who think this was a good plan?
Apparently the judge did.
Besides the cops and besides the judge. Like actual people. Like people who behave like human beings.
Oh, people, not pigs.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the whole thing. I mean, is this... I think anybody can say, you can certainly make the excuse that, well, if we do knock, they're likely going to flush the drugs, and that's our evidence. And if we're going to put these heroin dealing, 59-year-old couple in jail, then we have to catch them with it in their hands. People can wrap their heads around that because they've been convinced that there's a war on drugs, and they're convinced that this war is winnable, despite the fact that we've spent $1 billion over.
It's way more than that.
50
they managed
years.
to prosecute me based just on what they bought from me. They didn't have to do a no-knock raid. They arrested me in a parking lot.
Right.
Perfectly safe.
But another appeal of the no appeal.
Right. They specifically didn't want to arrest you like here on this property because there's cameras all over the place.
Right.
Well, there's cameras all over the place, and there's more than one gun, or at least there certainly has been.
They wanted you alone. They wanted you separate from your friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They wanted me separate from my friends, and they thought they were going to get me without my friends knowing.
Right.
They were like, we want to get you back to the Keene Activist Center before anybody knows you've been arrested. I remember I said to the FBI agent, you have no idea who I am, do you? they 800 people knew I was arrested before we left the CVS parking lot because Wendy had called Pork 411, so that was absolutely true.
So the other aspect of this is I'm kind of a gun guy. You guys both know that. I like my toys and things like that, and I imagine a lot of people
Guns
like
aren't
myself.
toys, kids. Guns aren't toys.
Yes, that's right. The police may attract some gun guys too.
Sure.
And it's got to be awfully frustrating if you have all these really cool toys, but you never get a chance to break them out and use them. I can see that.
Well, I mean, they can use them anytime they want on the practicing range.
They can go to the range.
But it's not the same as taking a life from somebody, if that's what you're really into.
Right, and knocking down doors, busting heads. I mean, that's
well, there's an
whole thing.
adrenaline factor, and a lot of cops are addicts. They're addicted to different things. They're addicted to adrenaline. They're addicted, in some cases, to alcohol, in some cases, to abusive sex. So cops have their vices. And it reminds me of Barry Cooper, who some of you might remember. He was a guest on Free Talk Live, living down in Mexico now. But Barry is an interesting character because he was a narcotics officer down in Texas, actually. He was the Narcotics Cop of the Year down in Texas at some point in the past when he was younger. And we had him on our show years ago, probably like a decade ago now. And he told us about how when he first became an officer, he would get an adrenaline rush off of just pulling somebody over, just for like speeding or whatever, some sort of non-risky thing. Just the fact that pulling somebody over was an adrenaline boost for him. Eventually that dissipated, right? To where when he'd pull somebody over, there wasn't an adrenaline rush.
Right.
It was just normal. He was used to it. So he had to start upping the ante. He had to start escalating the situation to increase, sometimes artificially, but increase the danger to him, or the potential danger to him.
Get the same thrill.
So yeah, because he wanted to get that adrenaline rush again. And so he gave the example of how if he were investigating somebody for, let's say, cocaine, maybe he found some cocaine or whatever in somebody's car or whatever, he would leave the person unhandcuffed and just tell them to sit down on the side of the road, like, sit on the curb while I go and search your car. So the idea was give him a chance to run.
Right.
That way he would have the excuse to run after him, tackle him, beat him, and get that rush. So he had to keep upping the ante.
Yeah.
Just
and
like a
that's
junkie.
interesting. Yeah, and that's how addictions work.
Yep.
And, one thing that we really should not have on police forces, on SWAT teams, is people that have those particular afflictions, and that's what it is.
What's going to attract. They're going to attract those people.
Of course.
So how are you going to avoid that?
You first of all, you need to start disarming the police.
Or if you're going to, because the proposal to disarm the police probably isn't going anywhere anytime soon, even with all the terrible stories about how awful they are. So here's a middle point, a compromise. Because politics is all about compromise. How about the police don't do no-knock raids anymore? How about they never do a drug raid ever again? And you can reserve the actual no-knock raids for, trying to catch some murderer or something like that. How about that?
Kidnapper,
yeah,
maybe.
kidnapper.
Sure. How about somebody who robs a bank? They've taken millions of dollars that doesn't belong to them.
It's not going to...
Maybe.
People aren't going to be as upset. I mean, presuming they have the right suspect, and of course they're going to screw that up sometimes, but presuming they have the right suspect and the person they're actually raiding is a violent criminal who's harmed innocent people, nobody's going to get their hair bent out of place because a cop roughs up a wanted murderer.
Right.
It's just not going to be as controversial.
Right. But if we continue this path, what we're going to have is more people dying. And meanwhile, the police are sitting here going, why are you always painting us out to be the bad guys? Well, you just shot and killed 2 people in their home.
Plus the dog.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Because people care more about the dog,
As it turned out, breaking into the house without warning and opening fire with a shotgun were not a safer approach. It precipitated a shootout during which at least 5 officers were injured, 4 by gunfire, and 2 suspects were killed.
Wow.
Based on the official description of the raid, which was not recorded, it is entirely possible that Tuttle did not realize the armed men invading his home were police officers. It's hard to imagine that things would have turned out worse if police had taken the, quote, dangerous approach of announcing themselves. This disastrous search supposedly was the culmination of a 2-week investigation triggered by a neighbor's tip. During that time, police apparently did not manage to document suspicious activity at the house or even identify the owners who had lived there for 2 decades.
Wow.
Yet
That's some real detective work.
Right. Yet the officer who sought the warrant confidently informed his CI that, quote, narcotics were being sold and stored, quote, unquote, in the house. How did he know that? Exactly. And that's what we're trying to figure out here. That's what Reason's trying to figure out.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.